Angron was happy, not on a throne room, not on a battlefield where Primarchs clash and legends have written. A hillside on Nuceria, 100 gladiators against an army that numbered in the thousands. His brothers were dying around him. Men he had bled for years, men he had eaten besides and fought besides and watched die in every arena on the world that Nucerian nobles called entertainment. And they were winning. Not escaping, not retreating. Winning. Because Angron had trained them for exactly this. A last stand where they would carve their names into the bones of a war that had enslaved them. And then the Emperor arrived. He didn't come to fight, he came to take. He pulled his lost stones off their hillside. His brothers and sisters fought without him, and they died without him. This is not a story about traitor. This is a story about a father who never understood who had done wrong, and a son who never forgot. The story of Angron. Stick to the end and subscribe. This one matters. Before the Emperor, before the Horus Heresy, before the World Eaters, there was a child. Every Primarch fell from the sky during the Chaos Scatter. Each one landed on a wall that would shape them. Magnus found scholars. Perturabo found wars. Guilliman found a civilization worth preserving. Angron found a slave planet. Nuceria was a world built entirely around gladiatorial combat. Not the honorable kind. Not the kind where warriors choose their battles. The kind where men were owned, trained, and made to kill for the amusement of nobles who had never had a weapon themselves. The shadow who fell from the sky and survived an impact that should have killed anything human arrived in this world, and the Nucerians did what they always did. They bought him. And then they drilled the butcher's nails into his cores. This is the device that defines everything Angron became. Cortical implants wired directly into the brain's pain and reward centers. Rewired so that combat didn't hurt, but peace did. When Angron was still, when he was calm, when he was not killing, the nails fired. Constant, grinding agony that would stop only in violence. Uncontrolled mechanism. He fought, he won, he survived when nothing else could survive beside him. And over years in the pits, something happened to the Nucerian slave's master never anticipated. He built a family. The gladiators who fought alongside Angron were slaves like him. They had nothing. No walls, no name, no future beyond the next fight. But Angron trained them. He taught everything the nails and the years of survival had taught him. Not to fight for the crowd, to fight for each other. To survive together in a system designed to kill them one by one. They called themselves his brothers. Not a legion. Not a military formation. A family of condemned men who had chosen to die together rather than picked apart one by one in silence. By the time the slave revolt reached its peak, Angron had built something Nuceria had never seen in this arena. A fighting force that functioned as a single unit. They broke out. They fought across Nuceria, city after city. The gladiators took the walls and left the owners broken behind them. They never had a plan beyond survival. They didn't need one. They had Angron. And then the Nucerian military caught up with them. The final battle, a hillside, an army surrounded 100 exhausted gladiators. And Angron chose not to run. He chose to stand and fight and die with his brothers, because he had never had anything worth dying for until he had them. This was not despair. This was the only honorable death available to a man who had been a slave since childhood, to go down swinging alongside the people who choose to follow him. That is the moment the Emperor interrupted. Every Primarch has a wound. Perturabos is being used and then discarded. Magnus is being punished for a warning that was trying to save the Imperium. Angron's is simpler than either of those, and more devastating. He was robbed of the only meaningful choice he ever had. The Emperor could have let him fight and die with honor on the hillside. He could have waited. He could have come down to the battlefield himself and fought alongside them. Instead, he extracted his sons like a piece of equipment being reclaimed, and he left 100 men who had bled for Angron to be slaughtered without him. Angron never forgave it. Not in the years that followed, not when he was given a legion, not even when he stood at Ishtvan and the Heresy began, not when he ascended. He carried the hillside in him every hour of his existence, the precise moment when a god decided that 100 men enslaved brothers were worth less than a strategic investment in a Primarch. And here's what everyone gets wrong about Angron. His rage was never madness, it was accuracy. The butcher's nails amplified, made it impossible to control, made it impossible to reason with, but the core of it was completely rational. He had been enslaved, he had been taken by force, he had been handed a legion he didn't want, and told to serve an emperor he owned nothing. The nails turned the volume up. They didn't change what the signal was. The 12 Legion had a name before Angron, the War Hounds, Loyal, ferocious, controlled fighters who took pride in their discipline under fire. Angron looked at them and saw men who had never suffered correctly. Within years, he had reverse engineered copies of the butchered nails implanted to his own legion. The devices were primitive compared to the malignant originals, cruder, less refined, but the effect was the same. Combat became compulsion, peace became pain. Surgeons worked through the procedure knowing that the legionaries would die on the table. The mortality rate was significant enough that any sane commander would have halted the program. Angron did not stop it. He watched his son die and become what he was, and he considered preparation. The World Eaters emerged. Thousands of Astartes, each carrying the nails, each rewarded of the same constant pressure that had defined the Primarch since childhood. They became the most terrifying assault force in the Great Crusade, and the most unmanageable. When the killing started, the World Eaters could not stop. They did not distinguish between enemies and allies when the nails had deep enough. Complaints came from any other legion. Investigations were open. Angron ignored every single one of them, because the World Eaters were the only honest legion. Every other legion fought for purpose, for the Emperor, for glory, for civilization, for concept. The World Eaters fought because the nails demanded, because Angron had made them as close as possible to him, and Angron had never needed a reason beyond the one hammered into his cause on Nuceria. This is what the Imperium built, and they complain about it. This is what you created. When Horus raised his banner, he didn't have to convince Angron. Most Primarchs who turned traitor had a reason. Lorgar needed validation. Fulgrim needed perfection. Perturabo needed recognition. Angron needed none of these things. He had no loyalty to the Imperium. He had been brought by force, and forced to serve an emperor who had watched his brother die a calling necessity. When Horus offered him a war with no pretense for purpose beyond the war itself, Angron was already there. Ishvan 3. The World Eaters were given the surface. Angron had led the charge personally. While Horus betrayed his own loyalist officers in orbit, Angron fought on the ground for days without stopping. Not because Horus ordered it, but because the nails demanded, and the battle was still there to be found. His own generals had to drag him back to orbit when the Exterminatus was called, and he had lost himself entirely. At Ishvan 5, the Dropside Massacre, the World Eaters sealed the trap. 3 legions had descended believing they were reinforcing the brothers found instead that the guns had already turned. The killing that followed was total, but the nails were still killing him. By the time of the Shadow Crusade, when Angron and Lorgar waged war across Ultramar, the implants had degraded so far that Angron's brain was actively dying. He had seizures, he lost time. The nails that had always punished him were now consuming him from the inside. He would not survive much longer. And then Lorgar made a choice. Not Horus, not Khorne, Lorgar, the brother who had spent decades studying the warp, who had given wars to chaos, who had sacrificed trillions of lives in exchange for what he needed, and what he needed was this, the power to pull his brother back from the edge of death and push him through to something beyond it. On Nuceria, the war that he had enslaved him, the war he had returned and burned to ash, Lorgar performed a ritual that no living being had attempted before. As Angron fought Guilliman in the ruins of the war that he had made him, Lorgar chanted in a language that never spoke before any living thing. The sky opened. It rained blood. The World Eaters' own librarians, the Lapsychers in the Legion, tried to stop him and failed. One by one, they burned. Their nails fired for the last time. What rose from the fire was not Angron the Primarch. It was Angron the Demon Prince, the Red Angel, a being beyond mortality, beyond the degradation of the nails, beyond the Emperor's reach, and carrying every grievance or every year he had ever lived. This is the detail that matters. Lorgar did not ascend his brother out of devotion to chaos. He did it because Angron was dying, and it was the only way left to save him. Of all 20 Primarchs, of all the brothers who served the Emperor faithfully, who built empires and waged crusades, it was Lorgar, the one the Emperor humiliated and broke, who was the only one willing to go far enough to save Angron's life. Whether the butcher's nail still exists in the physical form it now carries is a question the Lord leaves deliberately open. What is certain is that the rage they built, the framework of pain and violence wound to him across a lifetime, never left. Khorne did not save Angron from what he was. Khorne made him eternal at it. He reached Terra already transformed. He fought at the siege not as human watching himself breaking apart, but as something the Imperium had never faced before and has never truly survived since. So here's the question the Imperium doesn't want to ask. The Emperor had 20 sons, well, 18. His greatest military asset was Horus, and the loss of Horus nearly ended humanity. But Horus fell through ambition, through pride. Chaos found a crack in a great man and widened it open. Angron had no crack. Angron was already broken, and the Emperor is the one who broke him. Not chaos, not the nails, not a war, not a betrayal that came later. The Emperor chose to pull him from that hillside. The Emperor pointed a broken, grieving, enslaved man at the legion and called in command. Was the Emperor's greatest failure Horus? Or was it the son whose name was already carved into a headstone the day the Emperor arrived on Nuceria and decided the strategy was worth more than 100 men who had chosen to die free? Drop your verdict below. Let me know if the Emperor had no choice or if he created a Red Angel himself. Blood for the Blood God, and I'll see you in the next one.